Welcome everyone. Happy Friday. I'm not sure if I know everyone on, so I'd like to just introduce myself. I'm Lori Bumbaco, and I'm a registered dietitian, but I also am board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition. And I'm at the center to perform several responsibilities as part of the nutrition services that we offer. So I'm hoping to host today's program and subsequent programs like this to answer any great questions that you have about the relationship of diet and nutrition and cancer. But I also work with individuals one-on-one. So if you're curious to learn more about that, just contact me. I'd love to explore some options for you. I also co-facilitate a couple groups, Weight Loss for Wellness, as well as a super fun, fantastic, progressive kitchen series called Longevity Kitchen. And I co-facilitate that with Debbie Cronenberger. And we explore food cultures for these long living societies and what is it about the foods that they eat and how they eat that seems to promote their health. So again, if you're curious to learn more about any of that, I'd love to discuss that with you. So you all, I thought, took it easy on me. You only gave me a few questions, but then I looked at the questions and they're not so straightforward. So I'm going to do my best to explain them in a concise, timely manner. But as always, I think if you know me, I like to really give you the whole story and as much information that can be helpful for you as possible. So what I'm actually going to do is share my screen because I created some content to help not only answer these questions in a way where you're hearing me share the information, but I want you to also see the information. And I certainly can email this content out to the group if you're interested in that. So let's get started. So I'm going to share my screen to show you the first question. And hopefully you can see it. Savina will contact me if you can't. So here's the first question. What are the best foods to help reduce inflammation in the gut? What a great question. So let me just minimize this and backtrack because what is inflammation in the gut? What really are we talking about here? So this graphic, it's quite complicated, but I wanted to demonstrate the distinction between what seems to be a healthy functioning gut, which is on the left here, versus an unhealthy gut that's really compromised and in a state of disease. And in fact, the disease here is Crohn's disease. And if you're familiar with that, that's one of the inflammatory bowel diseases. So here is sort of the epitome of what an inflamed bowel would look like, right? Under a significant disease state like Crohn's disease. So what's happening here, I just want to point out, what's happening here in the healthy gut is that we have this barrier. Okay, so you see barrier function here. So there's a couple components to this barrier. There are these columns here. You see these epithelial cells, and they're together in columns. And what we call the space in between are tight junctions. And so they are really creating this physical barrier that allows only nutrients through that we need to nourish our bodies, but it does not allow any toxins, right? Any pathogens or anything that's not supposed to cross the barrier. So this here, this side, is our intestine. And so when we eat or anything that's in our body that we metabolize, it's passing through. And we want to keep for our body the healthy stuff, and we want to eliminate the stuff that doesn't belong. So this first part of the barrier is allowing for the passage of nutrients. And we also get some water here, especially in the colon. The other part of the barrier is this top layer, this mucus layer. And what this mucus layer does, it's actually active. It secretes this substance called mucin. You see it up here. And mucin actually binds with bacteria as well. So if there's something here that doesn't belong, the mucin will bind with it and get rid of it. Now, what happens in a compromised gut is that you see first and foremost, there's this loss of this mucus layer. So there's this loss of this mucin, and there's this inability then to bind with the things that don't belong. So they remain here. Now there's also some loosening of these tight junctions, which isn't demonstrated very well, but these will kind of open up a little bit. And so now we have this barrier that's not functioning the way it's supposed to. It's this dysfunction. And the combination of those things are allowing this passage of pathogens or toxins that don't belong here. Now, this is a problem because most of our immune function, and here goes the dog. Sorry. So 70% of our immune function is within our gut. If you didn't know that, I think that's fascinating. So most of our immune function is here with these immune cells that function here. So we want them to be in the right state, hopefully not amongst other pathogens. So when they're activated, they start to become inflamed. And then they have to compensate for that by creating more substances that will help address the fact that these toxins are on this side. So it's sort of like this reciprocal, continual damage that occurs, right? So because of that, this loss of this barrier, there's damage to the gut. So what the problem is that we know this happens with inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, but we don't really know what this looks like for someone without that, right? So there's no great way right now of measuring, are you at a healthy gut or are you somewhat compromised? But we suspect that there might be some conditions where there is compromise, and that's if you've had an infectious diarrhea, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, chances are you might have lost some of this function, probably not to the extent of an inflammatory bowel disease. So the best way to understand you and maybe how your gut is functioning is to work with your medical team and certainly with your gastroenterologist especially. So what we do know about the inflammatory bowel diseases is that there is a way to help reduce this inflammation and to sort of repair the gut. So, and that's how I want to answer this first question. So fermentable fibers are one of the most well-known ways to help reduce inflammation. So fermentable fibers, a perfect two examples I want to give you are oats and barley. So these are fibers, but not just any fibers. These are actually fermented by the microorganisms that reside in our gut and the healthy microorganisms. So we consider them to be fuel. And without this fuel, the microbiota will break down that mucus layer and use it instead for its fuel. So remember, we want that mucus layer solid. So by eating fermentable fibers like oats and barley, we help to maintain that mucus layer. Also, when we eat fermented fibers, they metabolize them. So those microorganisms produce what's called short chain fatty acids that we otherwise wouldn't have. But because we ate fiber and then the microorganisms eat the fiber, they make these substances. And the short chain fatty acids have been shown to help maintain a tight barrier between those junctions. Remember, that's what helps avoid the passage of pathogens or bacteria that don't belong. Also, what has been shown is that vitamin D, a deficiency in vitamin D is associated with barrier dysfunction. So having adequate levels of vitamin D can restore the function of those junction proteins. And we also know that vitamin D has an important role in modulating inflammation, sorry. So where do we get vitamin D? Well, I think the statistic I heard is that 96% of Americans do not eat enough vitamin D. It's really hard to. But we do make vitamin D from the sunshine in the warmer months. And so it requires some sun safety, meaning being outside for about 15 minutes a few days a week. There are some fortified products that contain vitamin D. Dairy is a great example, but some of our fatty fish also have vitamin D. I'm going to talk more about vitamin D in just a moment. Vitamin A from our orange fruits and vegetables, as well as retinol, which is a form of vitamin A. This helps to maintain and protect that permeable aspect of the intestinal wall. So where do we find vitamin A? Beta carotene specifically is in sweet potato. It's a great source, as well as carrots. And then retinol is found in something like the whole egg. So those are great things to include regularly. Having inadequate amounts of zinc may disassemble the proteins in that tight junction. So we also, Americans tend to not eat a lot of zinc unless you're eating a lot of beef. But we do find zinc in things like yogurt as well as cashews. Curcumin, which is found in the fantastic spice turmeric. This helps to modulate the barrier during acute infections, which is amazing, right? So if you're having some sort of acute infection, it helps kind of solidify the function of the mucus layer as well as the proteins that are involved. And we know that curcumin is anti-inflammatory. It's probably one of the most anti-inflammatory substances in our diet. EGCG is a polyphenol. We find it in plants, and its greatest amount occurs in green tea. This has been shown to improve intestinal gut permeability, right? So it improves the ability of that barrier to keep things out that don't belong and allow for the passage of things that do. We also see that EGCG suppresses pro-inflammatory cytokines. So once there's some compromise in that barrier, those cytokines are released in response. And so this is a kind of a dual attack to help the gut. Omega-3 fats. I just heard this acronym the other day called SMASH, which I love. And so it's a great way to remember our fatty fish sources that are high in omega-3 fats. So that's salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. They are our richest source of omega-3 fats. They are anti-inflammatory, and the way that they work is that they sort of help clean up any debris, right? So clean up those pathogens and the bacteria in our gut. Now, on the other hand, there are some foods that can damage the gut. And what we know mostly at this point is that high fat diets, but not just any fat, saturated fats, seem to influence the microorganisms in a pro-inflammatory way. And so it creates this imbalance of inflammation because of the imbalance of the microbiome or microbiota. So where do we find saturated fats? It's in red meat, full fat dairy, and as well as our baked goods. That's where Americans consume saturated fats. So it's wise to sort of minimize your intake of those things. Also, high sugar diets. So the sugary foods that we eat tend to be in, we drink them in our sugary beverages, but also sugars that are added to foods, which I'm going to speak to in a moment. These decrease intestinal defenses. They actually change the shape of those tight junctions, right? So it reduces permeability and allows for the passage of things that don't belong. Alcohol also depletes protective proteins, and it creates this dysbiosis of the microbiota. So sometimes what we see in those that overconsume alcohol, they have the unfavorable microorganisms in their gut, and rather than the favorable or the beneficial microorganisms that could benefit and solidify that barrier. I think bottom line, if you're looking to really maintain a healthy gut, what we see from the research at this point in time, that eating a Mediterranean type of a diet has been associated with healthy gut function. If I have time at the end, I'll give you a great resource for the Mediterranean diet. I showed you number one, fiber, but fermentable fibers. So keep in mind, oats are fantastic. Barley, fantastic source of these fermentable fibers that our microbiota eat, and then they help to solidify the function, the permeability of the gut. EPA, those are our omega-3 fats that I pointed out with the SMASH list of fish, as well as vitamin A from retinol, beta carotene, and turmeric. And then I mentioned vitamin D levels. So you can check your vitamin D levels through blood work. I encourage you to consider doing that before jumping to take a supplement. So you can see how your levels are and if you require a supplement or not. Okay, so next question that was just along the same lines. What are the best probiotics to help restore gut health? At this point in time, we unfortunately do not have any good data. So it's really difficult to answer this question. If you think you want to take a probiotic for a specific reason, speak with your doctor. What we know right now is that some of the research has supported the decision to take a probiotic for very specific conditions. For example, antibiotic associated diarrhea. If you've had an infectious diarrhea, if you have IBS or IBD, there may be an indication for you to take a probiotic. But again, I encourage you to discuss that with your physician, specifically a gastroenterologist. If you do not have any of those conditions, we really don't see any good evidence that taking a probiotic is going to help, maintain or build your gut function. And I think it's because it's complicated, right? Like as I showed in that diagram, it's hard to really assess what your gut function is, right? Unless you have an image and you had maybe a colonoscopy where you could have some insight into how is that the gut lining looking. What I did include on here, and this again I can send to you, is that there have been some very small studies, but promising, where they have investigated specific strains of probiotics, and you see them listed there. They're certainly a mouthful, but they've shown in the study to help improve small bowel permeability. So I believe in those studies they used patients with IBS and IBD. So it might be worth considering. I don't want to give an answer about specific probiotics because it's really not fair for me to do that. If you wanted to contact me individually or we work one-on-one, I can give you a better answer for that. Okay, the third question is, what should we look for on labels to evaluate probiotics in the foods that we eat? What a great question. So as of right now, products are not required to list probiotic strains on labels. They're also not they're not required to list the amounts of probiotics on labels. So I just copied and pasted here a label, and this is from a kefir product. And so you see the various cultures that are listed there. It does not include the amounts. And so if you're looking to achieve a benefit in terms of that specific role of a probiotic to improve a specific condition, then you would want to take a dietary supplement. But if you're looking to just maintain, good gut health because you're otherwise feeling relatively well, to include these fermented foods such as kefir or yogurt, and to get a variety of them. So if you look at labels and you see different brands have different types of cultures used, that's what I would recommend, because that's offering you really diversity and a variety of different cultures to introduce to your gut. Not all, you'll see though, you might be surprised, not all labels have the probiotic cultures listed. Now, there are, I wanted to point this out, there are also some products on the market that might not naturally have probiotics in them, right? It might not be a fermented product. And so I thought I would point this one out to you. So this is a juice, and there's so many ways to dissect this label, but this particular juice has probiotics added to them, and I pointed that out here with the arrow. So there's some Bifidobacterium lactis in this particular product. So the problem is that this product was very likely pasteurized, and what we know about probiotics are that they require very strict living conditions in order to survive. And so that's a key component to making decisions about probiotics, whether they be in a dietary supplement or in the food form, is that they need to survive. So they have a lifespan and they require certain conditions in order to survive and make it through to your gut. So anytime a probiotic is heated, especially to the point of pasteurization, very likely it destroyed all of the probiotics in this product. And I just want to point out also that this peach passion fruit juice is really, if you look, it's really just apple juice with maybe a little bit of other flavors added. So I don't think a great product. And certainly not a great product just because it contains quote unquote probiotics, because chances are it doesn't. And so I advise, and what the experts advise, is that it's best to choose those naturally fermented foods that have probiotics in them naturally. So here you have listed yogurt, kefir, kimchi, kombucha, sometimes sauerkraut if it's fresh and it's in the refrigerated section, or if you made your own. Those are good sources of probiotics. Okay, and the last question I want to get to before I maybe pull up some additional resources. Hang on. This one came in last minute, and I'm so glad it did. What a great question this is. How much sugar is too much for anyone to eat? I probably get asked this question every day, and it's so complicated, and the answer is not very straightforward, but we have some guidance to offer. So I just want to backtrack that there's a distinction between types of sugar in our diet. And really what we're doing right now is categorizing them between natural and added sugars. So natural sugars we see occur naturally in things like fresh fruit, dairy, and even starches, but they do not need to be limited as part of a healthy diet. Natural sugars are contained within a whole package of nourishment. And so when we eat foods that have natural sugars, they are healthful for us and they are recommended to eat. Now, on the other hand, added sugars are what they sound like they are. They are literally sugars that are added to foods. Now, some foods that are processed have processed sugars. Some foods have naturally occurring sugars that are added. So something like honey, we actually include in the added sugars category because we wouldn't have honey on its own necessarily. We typically have honey added to a food. So it's an add, even though it's naturally occurring, we consider it added sugar. Now, added sugars lack nutrition, and they also are concentrated sources of calories. So most foods with added sugars are highly processed, really rendered much inferior to the natural forms of sugars. So a good example of added sugars, or a food that we find added sugars in, is in our fruit flavored yogurt. So again, I copied and pasted a label of this is actually you see it's a vegan friendly yogurt. Um, and it's good thing it's non-GMO. There's no artificial flavors or preservatives. We got billions of probiotics in here. They do not list which ones, but there are 16 grams of added sugars in this serving size, which is 5.3 ounces. So for every 4 grams of added sugars, that's the equivalent of a teaspoon. So if we did the math for this particular product, this has 4 added teaspoons of sugar. Hopefully that astounds you because that is a significant amount of added sugar. So what's nice about this label, and most labels now you'll see, it's mandatory that they list the added sugars, because before, just a few months ago, we did not know how much added sugars were in a particular food. So yogurt's a really great example where there's 20 grams of sugars, but 16 of them are added. So 4 grams of sugars are from the natural source. So probably from whatever they're using in terms of the dairy alternative, because there is no dairy in this product. So this 4 teaspoons is quite a lot. And the reason why that's quite a lot is that our best guidance for added sugars, and this is from the American Heart Association, which I think is fantastic, they recommend no more than 6 teaspoons for women per day, or if you were to count grams, 25 grams per day, or if you were to look at calories, which I think is a little complicated, no more than 100 calories of added sugars per day. And so for men, because they're bigger and they eat more than women do, they're allowed to have just a little bit more. You see the numbers there. Now, Americans actually eat, I think, up to 23. No, I'm sorry. They eat, I think, triple the amount of this. So we have a long way to go to reduce the added sugar in our diet. You see the top sources of added sugars here. It's typically in our sugary drinks, sweet breakfast choices, including cereals and bars, added, right, like the honey, candy, our high fat, high sweet dairy, and then our baked goods. So that's where we find added sugars. Okay, so let me minimize that. And I just want to show for you a couple resources. This is from Old Ways. So if you're looking for more information about the Mediterranean diet, their website is fantastic. They have tons of resources, and they also have recipes. It's really phenomenal. So if you're looking to follow something like a Mediterranean diet, which is a really fantastic diet pattern, not really a diet, it's just a way of eating. It seems to be one of the healthiest ways to eat by far, and really tasty, if you ask most people. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this because I will also want to share another resource with you. And so this is a website that I like to recommend for those of you interested to learn more about prebiotics and probiotics. And so on this consumer tab, you'll see there are infographics, there are videos, they even have a blog with updates. And these videos are so fun. They're literally like 2 or 3 minutes and so informative about probiotics, prebiotics, even fermented foods, as well as how to choose a probiotic, how probiotics are not the same, and then even the health benefits of probiotics, what we know of right now and what we don't know. So check those out as well if you're curious to learn more.